They locked him in the public waiting room inside the front entrance of the building, where he had access to a toilet with running water. Apart from that, he only had train station-style waiting room seating in a locked public reception foyer. They did not offer him any food or water. Every regular period, say 6 hours for example, they had someone walk into the room, walk over to him, and stand in front of him with a set blank face. They looked at him, waited until he turned to face them, took a photograph of his face with a newspaper-style camera, and then walked away and left again. They continued that process daily, whilst he was not offered any food or water. He only had access to the toilet and its hand basin, and was trying to sleep on the waiting room seating. The only break from that routine was when he was asked for his identity documents, which he had no choice but to hand over. As the days passed, his physical and mental condition deteriorated, with photographs taken every regular period. It resulted in a catalogue of time-lapse-like photographs of him deteriorating physically and mentally over the days he was held illegally, severely affecting his appearance. Unfortunately, those photographs have been available to neo-Nazi types for quite some time. If any individual searches the name Paul von Hindenburg on an internet search engine, quite a few photographs of my great-grandfather Sebastian will appear that were taken whilst he was locked in that waiting room, showing his gradual deterioration in condition due to lack of sleep, fresh water, food, and general rest. People who pretend he gasped in excitement hoping to get relieving news and be let into his apartment, then slumped like an upset child when all that happened was another photograph of his head being taken, are fictionalizing events. The images only appear when von Hindenburg's name is searched, because they looked so similar, and the people responsible tried to erase Sebastian from historical events to cover up his sexual relationship with Kaiser Adolf. A large percentage of the photographs of Sebastian have been altered to make him look more like von Hindenburg. Paul von Hindenburg died in 1934. Kaiser Adolf and Sebastian were not an official couple until 1943, so the images of them together cannot be von Hindenburg. Sebastian was illegally transported to a maximum security prison at Daccau that had been taken over by traitors, terrorists, and lunatics involved with the terrorism group responsible for the heinous crimes starting December 1943, the neo-Nazis. They had given themselves that name after mass murdering nearly all German federal parliament MPs in December 1943. Before Chancellor and Kaiser Adolf's abduction and the terrorism wave that mass murdered almost all German parliamentarians, the prisons were full of what some people would call the most evil maximum security villains of Germany and Europe in some cases. The terrorism group had immediately gone to each of those prisons, killed all the staff and released all the evil inmates to join in the pre-planned crime wave. In some cases, the former inmates were saying it was like the ultimate Christmas present to see the prison staff killed before their eyes and then get released to join a violent mass murder uprising of evil that had already murdered near all the German parliament and abducted the Kaiser, who was also Chancellor. The decision was made by the newly named neo-Nazis to fill the empty jails with any homosexuals detained after the parliamentarians were murdered. Any homosexuals segregated from the public were shipped to each former maximum security prison and illegally detained, one gender per prison, of all ages, until they became massively overcrowded. The evil former inmates, who were in some cases serving life without parole sentences for murder, rape, and genital mutilation, were then allowed to take over running the prisons full of illegally detained and bewildered homosexuals. Those homosexual victims had been living quietly in World War II Germany just weeks before. Metaphorically speaking, former inmates of the type of John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, and Jeffrey Dahmer went from being inmates to running the prisons when they were filled with confused homosexuals. There is no way for someone like me to describe how horrific it was. It took as little as around 4 to 8 weeks. Sebastian was shipped to Daccau and illegally detained. The illegally run prison was basically an ad hoc evil former inmate lunatics run attempt to torture homosexual men, males, into pretending to be sexually attracted to females in exchange for promises of basic items like food, blankets, clothing, showers, etc. Prince Sebastian's identification documents were later found on the body of a wealthy Jewish man who held a government administration position, murdered in Poland at Auschwitz, at a site that is now a memorial. A part of what the neo-Nazis eventually claimed was their routine. Prince Sebastian was found in the prison at Daccau when it was taken by British troops in 1945, with no identity documents. Others were also found, including Hermann Göring, who had been so severely disfigured in the face after his abduction that he was unrecognizable. Hermann was found in Daccau, freed in 1945, settled elsewhere, and died in the 1960s. Biologically he was a Webb, like me, therefore related. An Irish life without parole inmate, in jail for heinous sexually themed crimes, became Hermann's imposter after being illegally busted out of Daccau by the neo-Nazis. Surname O'Shea, he was made over by a former professional film production crew to look like Hermann Göring for the neo-Nazis' genocide dress UPS. In a similar way to New Zealand-born female Isabel Williams, Charles Manson's mother was made over to look like Kaiser Adolf in 1944 complete with costume, before being found dead in the bunker in 1945 on top of Janet Podolsky, pretending to be Eva Braun. Surname O'Shea, that evil former inmate went from serving life without parole in November 1943 to being the new torture governor, running the prison when it started illegally being filled with homosexuals weeks later. O'Shea was eventually trialed at Nuremberg for the crimes he committed against homosexuals in Daccau after he illegally took over running the prison for the neo-Nazis in 1944. He was also tried for pretending to be Hermann Göring, which is why text reading the name Hermann Göring was displayed on footage of him being tried at Nuremberg. Unfortunately, the displayed text did not say the full sentence. This man is also charged with falsely using the identity of Hermann Göring when the charges were announced in court. Because the full sentence wasn't displayed, that fake history created a virtual world when television was invented after WW2 lunatics pretend Shea was really going afterwards. Still do. I do not have to add a precautionary allegedly here, as Shea was found guilty of the crimes I mentioned during the Nuremberg trials. Shea was serving life without parole, labeled never to be released by the courts, and had been sentenced to 9 separate life without parole jail terms when he escaped prison in December 1943, approximately. He was horrifically evil and a prime example of the type of person who took over the neo-Nazis after the original neo-Nazis busted types like him out of jail. They all then participated in several separate mass genocides. Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern escaped prisoner of war jail in Yugoslavia in 1959 and made a grueling trek like a wanted fugitive over 1,000 kilometers to Italy. During his interrogation by mainly Italian authorities and some others in 1960, Kaiser Adolf Hitler the Hohenzollern was reunited with his former consort Prince Sebastian Habsburg. It was to see how much it would upset him after the authorities discovered Prince Sebastian was still alive, but terminally ill and in palliative care. My 2 great-grandfathers were put into a room together and tentatively checked each other, then spent a few days talking quietly. My great-grandfather Prince Sebastian died in 1960, around 6 days after being reunited with my great-grandfather Kaiser Adolf Hitler for the first time since 1943. Photographs taken of him after his death sometimes appear when people look for images during basic internet searches. There may also be illegally recorded audio, recorded secretly by the Italian-based law enforcement team who had been interrogating Kaiser Adolf after his escape from Yugoslavia in 1959. People have often asked me why I haven't looked ancestors up on the internet more often. Now they know why. Extremely distressing photographs of dozens of my ancestors and their family members taken whilst they were being tortured by terrorists are unavoidable when researching on the internet. My grandfather Duke and Lord James Webb, the Habsburg, did not receive his royal inheritance in Austria and Hungary when his father Prince Sebastian Habsburg died in 1960. Their illegal excuse was that he became an Australian citizen as a child and married a Gippsland woman, my indigenous grandmother Myrtle.